Animal Farm, Chapter 7, Part 1. It was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then a hard frost, which did not break till well into February. The animals carried on as best they could with the rebuilding of the windmill, well knowing that the outside world was watching them, and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill were not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings had pretended not to believe that it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said that it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not true. Still, it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick this time, instead of the 18 inches as they had before. This meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time, the quarry was full of snowdrifts, and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was hard work, and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold, and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor, but the other animals found more inspiration in Boxer's strength and in his never-failing cry of, "I will work harder." In January, food fell short. The corn ration was drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted, which meant that it had turned green because it had not been covered thickly enough. The potatoes were soft, and only a few were edible. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to eat but straw and nuts. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing new lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was being put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting among themselves and had resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Whymper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto, the animals had had little or no contact with Mr. Whymper on his weekly visits. Now, however, a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that the rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins of food in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which was then covered up with what remained of the grain and oats. On some suitable pretext, Mr. Whymper was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the food bins. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world that there's no food shortage on Animal Farm. Nevertheless, towards the end of January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. And these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all of his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. When he did come out, it was in a ceremonial manner with an escort of 6 dogs who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came too close. Frequently, he did not even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his orders through one of the other pigs, usually Squealer. One Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens, who had just come in to lay again, must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted through Mr. Whymper a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of these would pay for the extra grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and the conditions grew easier. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but they had not believed that it would really happen. They were just getting their nest ready for the spring sitting, and they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion of Mr. Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. Led by 3 young black Minorca roosters, the hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which then smashed to pieces on the floor below. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations to be stopped and decreed that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. For 5 days the hens held out, then they gave in and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meanwhile. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was said that they had died of a disease called coccidiosis. Mr. Whymper heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered, a grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. All this while no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms. He was either on Foxwood or in Pinchfield. Napoleon was by this time on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in the barnyard a pile of wooden boards which had been stacked there 10 years earlier when a beech tree had been cut down. It was well seasoned, and Mr. Whymper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were eager to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed on the point of coming to an agreement with Mr. Frederick, Snowball was declared to be hiding at Foxwood, while when he was inclined toward Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly sneaking onto the farm in the night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night, it was said, he came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he chewed the bark off the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute it to Snowball. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. And when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under a sack of grain. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome that winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities. With his dogs in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings, the other animals following at a respectful distance. At every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which he said he could detect by smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cowshed, in the hen houses, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground, give several deep sniffs, and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball! He has been here. I can smell him distinctly." At the word "Snowball," all the dogs let out blood-curdling growls and showed their side teeth. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed to them as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence, pervading the air about them and menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together and, with an alarmed expression on his face, told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades!" cried Squealer, making little nervous skips. "A most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But there is worse than that. We had thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition. But we were wrong, friends. Do you know what the real reason was?
Snowball was in secret league with Jones from the very start. He was Jones' secret agent all the time. It has been all proved by documents which he left behind him, which we have only just discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal, friends. Did we not see ourselves how he attempted, fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed in the Battle of the Cowshed?
The animals were mystified. This was a wickedness far outdoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take it in. They all remembered, or thought that they remembered, how that they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed, how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant, even when the pellets from Jones' gun had wounded his back. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with his being on Jones's side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his forehooves beneath him, shut his eyes, and with hard effort managed to gather his thoughts. "I do not believe that," he said finally. "Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw him myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards?"
"That was our mistake, comrade, for we know now it's all written down in secret documents that we have found that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom."
"But he was wounded," said Boxer. "We all saw him running with blood."
"That was part of the arrangement," cried Squealer. "Jones' shot only grazed him. I could show you this from his own writings if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowball at the critical moment to give the signal for flight and to leave the field to the enemy, and he very nearly succeeded. I will even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember, just at the moment when Jones and his men had got inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, and many animals followed him? And do you not remember, too, that it was just at that moment, when panic was spreading and all seemed lost, that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward with a cry of 'Death to humanity!' and sank his teeth into Jones' leg? Surely you remember that, comrades!" exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee, but Boxer was still a little uneasy. "I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning," he said finally. "What he has done since is different. But I believe that at the Battle of the Cowshed, he was a good comrade." "Our leader, Comrade Napoleon," announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, "has stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones' agent from the very beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of."
"Oh, that's different," said Boxer. "If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right."
"That's the true spirit, comrade," cried Squealer, but it was noticed that he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go, then paused and added impressively, "I warn every animal on this farm to keep his eyes wide open, for we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us at this moment."